I had always thought that things were perfect between us. We were a couple who had been through so much together, yet we always seemed to come out stronger. I trusted him completely, and I believed in the love we shared. The way we would talk for hours about our dreams, our future, everything felt like it was destined to last. But then something began to shift. It was subtle at first, small changes that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He became distant, a little colder, less affectionate. He stopped initiating conversations like he used to, and when he did speak, it was almost as if he was going through the motions. His gaze would drift, and he no longer looked at me with the same spark in his eyes. I tried to convince myself it was just stress from work. Maybe he was just tired. He always had a lot on his plate, after all. But the little things kept piling up. The long hours he spent on his phone, texting or scrolling through social media, always with his screen turned away from me. It was as though he was trying to hide something, but I wasn't ready to confront it. I thought, maybe I'm just being paranoid. After all, he'd been my rock for so long. Why would he suddenly change? And yet, with every passing day, the space between us seemed to grow. He didn't notice how I longed for the days when we'd just sit and talk, uninterrupted. I missed the simple closeness we once had. I'd ask him how his day was, but his responses were always curt, almost dismissive. Work was fine. Same as usual. There was no excitement in his voice, no curiosity about my day, as if he wasn't invested in me the way he used to be. It was as though his attention was elsewhere, and I had started to feel like I was no longer the priority. When we were together, his mind seemed to be somewhere far off, and I wondered if he was planning something behind my back. It couldn't be, I told myself. I was just overthinking. I also noticed how often he'd go out with friends now. There were evenings when he'd say he was meeting up with them after work, and I'd be left at home, trying to convince myself that it was normal. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he wasn't doing it as often before. He would come home late, sometimes smelling of alcohol, and I'd ask how his night went, but his stories never seemed to add up. The vague details, the reluctance to talk about what really happened, there was something off about it, but I brushed it aside. Maybe he was just trying to enjoy his time with his friends, I thought. One evening, when he came back after one of these late nights out, I noticed something that caught my attention. He had changed his password on his phone. I didn't think much of it at first, but when he left his phone on the kitchen counter one morning while he took a shower, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity. I didn't want to invade his privacy, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The screen lit up, and I saw a message notification from a number I didn't recognize. The message simply read, "Can't wait to see you tonight," followed by a series of heart emojis. My heart dropped into my stomach. I wanted to dismiss it, to convince myself it was a harmless message. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It wasn't just a friend reaching out. There was something more to it. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it could be a friend, a colleague, or someone from work. But the feeling of dread only grew. That was when I started thinking about all the little things I had noticed over the past few months. How he'd become more guarded, how his phone was always out of reach, how he never mentioned his plans or the people he was seeing. The doubts I had pushed away were now coming into full focus, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. The worst part was that I didn't even know how to approach him about it. I was terrified of what I might find out, but I couldn't live in this state of uncertainty forever. I needed to know the truth, even if it broke me. At that moment, I realized I was no longer the person who was at ease with the relationship. I had lost my sense of security, and it was slipping through my fingers faster than I could grasp it. Was I being overly suspicious? Or was this the beginning of something I had been too blind to see? The more I thought about it, the more I feared that the relationship I had invested so much into was now on the verge of falling apart. But I couldn't bring myself to confront him yet. What if I was wrong? I wondered. What if I ruined everything over a simple misunderstanding? That uncertainty, that hesitation, kept me in limbo. I stayed silent, hoping that everything would go back to normal, but deep down, I knew that things were changing in a way that I couldn't ignore anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. And what if it was worse than I imagined? What if he was already emotionally involved with someone else? In that moment, the distance between us felt like a chasm that I couldn't bridge. The man I thought I knew so well had begun to slip away, and I had no idea if I could find my way back to him. I had no answers, just a growing fear that the relationship I had cherished was beginning to unravel. But I still didn't know what to do with the nagging sense that something wasn't right. The more I ignored it, the more it festered inside me. I was left with nothing but doubt and an aching sense of impending loss. I had always prided myself on being a trusting person. I never imagined I would find myself in this situation, but when I discovered the truth, it shattered everything I had believed about our relationship. It wasn't just the message on his phone that had been eating away at me. It was the realization that I had been ignoring all the signs for months. I had let my doubts linger, always convincing myself that I was overthinking things, but now there was no denying it. He was hiding something, and that something was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The day I confronted him was the hardest moment of my life. I hadn't planned on it, but when I saw him come home late again, his eyes avoiding mine, I could no longer keep quiet. I didn't even know where to start. My hands shook, and my voice felt small as I asked, "Who's texting you like that?" He looked taken aback, his eyes narrowing as if I had caught him in the middle of a game. For a brief moment, I thought he might deny it, brush it off as nothing. But instead, he did the exact opposite. He seemed almost defensive. "It's nothing," he said quickly, but his voice lacked the usual assurance. "A friend from work." But his response was flat, unconvincing. I could feel my heart pounding, the words I had been holding back for so long finally bursting out. "No, it's not. I saw the messages." "Who is she? Who are you seeing behind my back?" I had asked the question before I even realized what I was saying, and once it was out, there was no turning back. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to process what was happening. His expression was blank, but I could see the guilt creeping into his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was caught, and I could tell that the weight of what he had done was finally sinking in. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you, but it just happened." His words felt like a slap across my face. I had been so sure of us, so convinced that we were different from the couple. The days following the confrontation were a blur. I felt numb, like I was moving through life in a fog. It was impossible to escape the crushing weight of the betrayal. The trust one had so carefully built over the years had been shattered in an instant, and I couldn't seem to find my footing. My emotions were a tangled mess, swinging wildly between anger, sadness, and disbelief. Every moment felt like a punch to the gut, and no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the reality of what had happened never left my mind. I didn't know what I wanted from him, or even for myself. Part of me wanted him to fix it, to somehow make it all go away. But I also knew that was unrealistic. Nothing would make the hurt go away, not his apologies, not his promises, not his explanations. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear them anymore. He had broken me in ways I never imagined possible, and I couldn't just ignore it or pretend things would go back to normal. They never would. The first night alone in the apartment was the hardest. I couldn't stop thinking about all the moments we had shared, the laughter, the love, the connection. I felt sick to my stomach realizing that, all along, he had been lying to me. Every sweet gesture, every kind word, every moment of affection now felt hollow. I couldn't stop asking myself why he had done it. Was I not enough? Was there something wrong with me? Those questions ate away at my self-worth, and for a while, I didn't know how to stop them. The next few days, I found myself pulling away from everything. Friends called, but I didn't have the strength to talk to anyone. They didn't know the pain I was in, the agony of seeing the person you loved and trusted betray you in the worst way. The isolation was both comforting and painful. I didn't want to face the world. I didn't want anyone to see my hurt, my confusion. But at the same time, I felt so incredibly alone. It was like I was trapped in my own head, unable to escape the endless thoughts that tormented me. When I finally spoke to him again, I wasn't sure what I hoped to gain. He seemed genuinely remorseful, begging me to forgive him, promising that he would do whatever it took to fix things. But his words didn't reach me. I could see the desperation in his eyes, but all I felt was disgust. How could he stand there, looking me in the eyes, after everything he had done? How could he think that I could ever trust him again? I told him I needed space. I needed time to think, to process. But honestly, I didn't know what I was looking for. Was I hoping for clarity? Or was I just afraid of what I might find if I truly faced the truth? I didn't want to admit that maybe there was no coming back from this. Maybe this was the end of us, and no amount of apologies or promises could fix it. I didn't want to face the possibility of losing everything we had built, but deep down, I knew it was already gone. The emotional roller coaster I was on didn't make things any easier. One moment, I wanted to scream at him for the pain he caused me. The next, I wanted to hold him, to pretend that everything would somehow be okay. I was torn. But when I really allowed myself to look at the situation, I realized the truth was staring me in the face. I couldn't unsee the betrayal. I couldn't unknow the lies. And most importantly, I couldn't go back to being the person I was before. I had to protect myself now. But it wasn't just about him. It was about me, too. For the first time, I had to ask myself hard questions. What kind of relationship had we really been in? How much had I been ignoring? How much had I let slide for the sake of avoiding conflict? I wasn't perfect, but I had given him my trust and my heart, and he had thrown it all away. In that moment, I knew I needed to find a way to heal, even if that meant letting him go. The pain was unbearable, and there were times when I thought I wouldn't be able to get through it. But as the days went on, something inside me started to shift. I began to understand that I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the one who had betrayed us. I was the one who had been hurt, the one who had been deceived. And while I couldn't change the past, I had the power to control what happened next. There were moments when I wanted to pick up the phone and call him, to hear his voice, to ask him why he had done it. But I resisted. I knew that getting caught up in another round of empty apologies and broken promises wouldn't help me heal. It would only delay the inevitable. I had to let go. I had to face the reality that the person I had once loved no longer existed, and that the relationship we had wasn't worth salvaging. It was hard, incredibly hard, to accept that the love I had given him had been misplaced. But the more I allowed myself to feel the pain, the more I realized that I could survive it. I didn't need him to be whole. I could rebuild myself, piece by piece. I began to take small steps forward. I reached out to friends who had been supportive, even though I had kept my distance for so long. I started doing things for myself again, activities I had let slip because I had been so focused on him and our life together. Slowly but surely, the fog began to lift. And with each passing day, I realized that I didn't need him to define my worth. I could move on. I could heal. And I could be whole again without him. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself settling into a new reality, one that felt both foreign and necessary. I had spent so much time clinging to the past, to the version of my life that had been shattered, that I hadn't fully grasped the weight of moving on. But the process was inevitable. I couldn't live in the same space of pain forever, even if every step forward felt like a betrayal to the version of me that had believed in him, that had believed in us. I didn't hear from him for a while after I told him I needed space. At first, I thought the silence was a relief. It gave me room to breathe, room to think without the constant pressure of his guilt-ridden apologies. But as time passed, the silence became louder. It wasn't just the physical silence of him not being around. It was the emotional silence, the absence of the love I had once thought was unconditional. I had to face the fact that I had been living in a fantasy, building my whole world around a man who had no interest in preserving the integrity of what we shared. I began to take stock of the life I had been too distracted to live fully. I started to reconnect with friends I had neglected, the people who had always supported me but whom I had distanced myself from while prioritizing the relationship. I found comfort in their presence, in their reminder of who I was before all of this. It was humbling to acknowledge how much I had let slip in favor of him, of our relationship, and how I had sacrificed pieces of myself to make sure everything looked perfect on the outside. But perfection was a facade. and now it was gone. What remained was me, and I was determined to find out who I really was without him. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but slowly, the sharp sting of betrayal softened into a dull ache, one that I could manage. I began to focus on myself in ways I hadn't in years. I took long walks, rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace when I was alone. I wasn't afraid of the solitude anymore. It wasn't emptiness, it was an opportunity to rebuild, to reclaim the parts of me